What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily. So last week I did a video re-reviewing the Samsung Galaxy A71, and following that video, a lot of you guys wanted me to do the same for the A51 as well, since this phone has now also been out for 8 or 9 months. And that's exactly what we're going to do in this video. The A51 has really been one of my favorite phones overall this year. I still really do like it, and I'd absolutely recommend it even now. But I do have some additional thoughts and opinions about this phone now, especially since there's the A51 5G that's out, which I will discuss. So I'm going to give you all of my thoughts on this phone after some long-term use, and hopefully this will help you decide if you're considering this device maybe for the upcoming holiday season. Now, right off the bat, the first thing that attracted me to this phone earlier in the year was the price. When it launched internationally, it came in at just under $300. When it came to the US, it was a $400 phone for some reason, but now that a good chunk of time has passed, prices have come down, and you can pick up an unlocked A51 on Amazon, for example, for like $260. And there's even renewed A51s that just got listed too, for a bit under $250. One thing I want to make clear though, the phone I'm talking about here is the regular A51, the non-5G version. The newer A51 5G is a different device. It came out later in the summer, it got a little bit of a spec bump, but most importantly, the 5G version is also significantly more expensive. We're talking $500 here in the US for that phone. That's a pretty big difference. So let me just break down what exactly you do get for all that extra cash. There's 5G support, obviously, or 5G ultra wideband support if you're on Verizon. It has a slightly better processor, a tiny bit bigger battery, and that's pretty much it. The RAM configurations are going to depend on where you're located in the world. You'll probably get 4 gigs on the standard A51 and 6 gigs on the A51 5G. But the main point I'm trying to make here is simply that the A51 5G, in my opinion, is just not worth the extra money right now in comparison. As you start to approach $500, you suddenly have a lot more smartphone options to choose from that may be better. And while yes, here in the US, the A51 5G is technically the cheapest 5G phone that the masses would know about, 5G just isn't all that valuable right now. Unless you're on Verizon, maybe. But for everyone else, the speeds aren't that much faster than LTE. And like I said, the rest of the upgrades, the processor and the RAM and the battery, none of those things are worth all that extra money. All in all, the regular old A51 is an even better value now than it was 8 or 9 months ago due to the price drop. And just like with the A71 5G, I don't think that the A51 5G is a good buy at all right now. So those are my thoughts on the pricing and the 5G stuff, but if you guys are interested in doing some comparison shopping of your own, or maybe want to buy one of these phones for yourself, I'll leave some links down below in the video description to where you can get the phones at their cheapest current prices. Now, with all of that stuff being said, I do want to talk about the performance aspect of this phone first. And the most important thing I want to mention is that my A51 here that I've been using is actually the lowest spec'd model. It has the Exynos 9611 chipset, just 4 gigabytes of RAM, and 128 gigabytes of UFS 2.0 storage. Now, like I mentioned a moment ago, depending on where you buy this phone and where you're located, you may be able to spec it up either 6 or 8 gigs of RAM, but to be honest, I don't even really think that's necessary. This phone, as is, has been really good for whatever I wanted it to do, and the continued Android and One UI updates this year have improved performance to the point where I think this phone feels even better than it did when it first launched. There's certainly no hiding the fact that it is still a mid-range phone, but in saying that, there's also nothing this phone can't do. When launching and loading everyday apps, things feel relatively smooth with very little blips or hiccups, even as I start to load more and more things. And while I'm not personally a huge gamer, I've enjoyed playing a handful of different games on this phone with no issues. Again, this is not a top-performing flagship device that runs games at a high FPS, so you shouldn't expect that. But what you should expect is a device with more than capable specs that can handle, I'd say, 95% of what you'd want it to do in an average day. With all that being said, Am I a fan of the Exynos processor? Not exactly, but Samsung's chipsets have been worse in other phones, like their flagship devices. And in this case, with this combination of specs and things, the Exynos 9611 has performed fine, all things considered. And more importantly, do I want to spend twice as much to get a 980 or a Snapdragon 765G in the 5G version of this phone? Absolutely not. Do I think 4 gigs of RAM is enough for this phone? For the most part, yes. Some apps need a refresh from time to time, but things still stay relatively current. Would I maybe get the 6GB version of this regular A51 if it were still under $300? Absolutely. But would I pay twice as much for 6 gigs of RAM in the 5G version of this phone? Absolutely not. With those sort of stipulations, like I said, I've come to the conclusion that this phone is perfect for my needs. It's not only a great value for the price, but it makes the A51 5G just look not so good. And by the way, Samsung has pledged 3 years of Android updates with this phone too. So looking ahead, I do think this device is going to be a decent investment, even now, after 8 or 9 months of it having already been released. Battery life on this phone for me has also been pretty decent. I'm getting a full day out of it with no issues, but I do want to mention that while yes, this phone has 4,000 milliamps, while the A51 5G is a 4,500 milliamp capacity, the difference there, in my opinion, is going to be negligible. It's not like you're going to get a ton of extra hours of life there, if anything at all. Physically, the A51 I think is a pretty good looking phone and looks about as modern and as up to date as you could ask for. Its 6.5-inch form factor gives you a ton of screen to work with, but the slim bezels and relatively thin body allow for some comfort even with one-handed use. It's not as tall or as lengthy as some other devices, which is kind of nice, but if you were hoping for a more compact smartphone, this isn't really that, and you'll likely need to go down one more notch to like the A41 instead. Around back, like all the A-series phones, this device has a plastic rear cover, which is fine. Its shiny finish and rainbow effect are what Samsung is known for, and pair that with a polished chrome frame and you've got all the elements to a premium material smartphone without it actually being real premium materials. The 6.5-inch display is bright, it's bold, it's a Super AMOLED panel with a resolution of 2400 by 1080 that packs in around 405 pixels per inch, and all in all, the viewing experience here is fantastic in every respect. And I'd say starting with the A-series last year and continuing on this year, Samsung has really offered some of the best displays on any mid-range phones. With that being said though, you have to keep in mind that this phone came out back in January, sort of before the big push for high refresh rate panels in cheaper phones. So I don't think something like the OnePlus Nord or the Pocophone X3, for example, are direct competitors to this A51. Maybe you could argue that with the A51 5G, since it's a newer, much more expensive device, but unfortunately the A51 5G actually has the exact same 1080p screen as this regular A51. There's no fancy high refresh rate there either. Now, I don't necessarily think the average consumer at this price point will care about that right now, and I won't exactly call it a negative for the A51 5G, but I will just say that looking ahead to next year, if Samsung does come out with more $500 A-series phones, I think they're likely going to need 90Hz displays at a minimum in order to keep up. Also, speaking of the display, there's that in-display fingerprint reader that we do need to talk about. Now for me, this is just something that started out not so great and is still not so great. For whatever reason, it's kind of slow, it tends to be inaccurate, and it's just not something I have been able to fix, even through re-adding the same fingerprints over and over again. One factor I believe that contributes to the not so great fingerprint reader obviously is the included screen protector that ships with this phone. It's a super low quality screen protector that obviously has seen better days. It's all scratched up and I've kept it on just out of convenience more than anything else, but I definitely recommend removing it and installing something better. Fortunately, Samsung's Face Unlock is very fast, so I don't really use the fingerprint sensor anyway, which works out fine for me. Another thing Samsung needs to add with these phones is a dual stereo speaker setup. I'll give them a pass this year. The single speaker is fine, if maybe a little tinny, but when sub $100 phones are launching now with a nicer out loud listening experience, it's definitely time for Samsung to step up their game. Last but not least, one area where this phone continues to shine, in my experience at least, is with the camera capabilities. With the A series phones this year, Samsung, I believe, put a ton of effort in not only adding lenses and features, but making these cheaper phones really good for taking pictures. And that's just not something we could have said with previous devices in this price range. With a decent price drop, I'd comfortably say this phone outshoots anything else in the $200 to $300 range, and I've taken some great shots with this phone these past few months. You've got a full suite of capabilities. There's a 48 megapixel main lens, which you can use the full extent of, a wide angle shooter, a macro lens, the depth sensor. It shoots 4K video, and it has all the bells and whistles in the camera app, like night mode and pro controls and slow-mo. There's literally nothing missing here. Does this phone outshoot something like the Pixel 4a? No, I don't think so. I also think with regular video as well, something like the 2020 iPhone SE may still be a better choice for that. But all in all, the A51 has thoroughly impressed me with its shooting capabilities this year. And if you guys are interested, I do have a ton of camera tests and picture and video comparisons on the channel already that go more in depth with the shooting capabilities. So here are my final thoughts with this phone. If you couldn't tell, I still really like it. I thought it was a great value back when it first released earlier this year, and I think it's an even better value now. With the A51 5G out, while it's a slightly improved device, I just don't think it's worth all that extra cash, when right now you can snag this regular A51 for well under $300. Maybe if your carrier is offering you some sort of a deal, sure, get the A51 5G. It is obviously the better phone, but all in all, I personally feel like the regular A51 is the way to go right now, and it'll continue to be a solid buy in the months to come. So there you go. Those are my updated thoughts on the A51 and obviously the A51 5G as well. What do you guys think about these phones? If you have either the A51 or the A51 5G, I'd love to know your own thoughts in the comments down below, of course. Also, be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.